So this essay started life as pure ramblings. I've attempted to revise it a few times to make it more coherent and structured, but I'm just gonna dive directly into it. I'm more than happy to clarify anything in the comments. So at the start of the 2013 NBC romantic comedy series Hannibal, Will Graham is being exploited by the FBI for his neurodivergency and constantly seems to suffer for it. Jack Crawford, in his first scene, specifically seeks out Will because he is neurodivergent, and Jack believes he can use this to solve various crimes. Will is powerless to stop the murders. His entire shtick is that he goes to crime scenes after the fact, yet he's forced to only ever imagine himself as the perpetrator. This can be seen as representative of the vilification of neurodivergency in media, and even though he tells every other character in the show that he does in fact empathize with and see himself in the victims just as strongly, Will's turmoil gets consistently ignored by the other characters until he gets worse and worse, and at his lowest point, which is incarceration in Baltimore State Hospital for the criminally insane, or prison, all everyone else does is speculate on how they failed to notice that he was one of the bad ones and not their perfectly masking, if a little bit quirky attack dog for so long. I hate to immediately go on a tangent about the justice system, but I think it is important to note how Will's neurodivergence was used to strip away his agency. He was offered to be spared the death penalty by pleading insanity, but at the same time, his beliefs about Hannibal prevented him from advocating his own innocence because other characters believed him to be delusional. Will was not allowed to be an expert on his own experiences, and this was used to incarcerate him. Even though Will wasn't strictly delusional, his beliefs were far from irrational. This didn't matter because functionally he still was in the eyes of the other characters due to their biases, and because the nature of delusions means that delusional is only ever a label that is applied to a person by an external party. Will faces a testimonial injustice here. The only reason he was acquitted was because Hannibal killed the judge after realizing that his plan to testify on behalf of Will wasn't gonna work out. This is also the reason why I don't accept Chilton's claim that Will isn't autistic because he never received a diagnosis. This statement presupposes that the system works perfectly and there's no possibility that anyone would ever fall through the gaps, and so it would be ironic to take it at face value given the context that this entire arc is about the system fucking up and letting Will fall through the gaps. So Will is consistently othered and made into an outsider. The other main outsider in the show is Hannibal. Hannibal has deficient empathy, so is also neurodivergent. This is taking the broader definition. I know some people use neurodivergent to refer to just autism and ADHD, but I am broadly compelled by the interactionist approach and recognize the genetic and unchosen and therefore natural component of all disorders. I'm also not going to refer to Hannibal specifically as a psychopath in this video, mostly because it's unclear in the text. Clarice rebukes Chilton's claim that he is a pure psychopath with "there's not a word to describe what he is," and I don't personally have narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, so despite the content of this essay, I will leave it to the people in those communities to decide if they want to claim him or not. Hannibal has deficient empathy, but he is capable of practicing compassion, as people with deficient empathy are. He has compassion for Will, says as much to Will, and talks about him constantly to Bedelia. While the clearly intended idea is that Will is, because of his empathy disorder, the only one who can understand Hannibal, the reverse is also true. Will is construed as rude or creepy all of the time due to being a bad conversationalist, antisocial, not making eye contact. This phenomena is best represented by Freddie Lowndes, the only journalist character in the show, so she acts as a stand-in for the media as a whole. She spends a good deal of her early screen time disseminating to the public various inaccurate portrayals of Will, like takes one to catch one, and on rewatch, when I heard the line, "It's not a good idea to piss off someone who thinks about killing people for a living," my first thought was, oh, that would absolutely end up on an I Am Very Badass cringe compilation. So the public perception of Will is that he is rude and impolite, yet Hannibal, who is best known for eating rude people, doesn't eat Will. He says that he intends or needs to multiple times, but somehow he never follows through, despite having no trouble doing so in the past. My interpretation is that Hannibal doesn't recognize Will's behavior as rude, because it's not. Will just communicates differently from other people. In my opinion, the shit he says about dead bodies is perfectly reasonable and barely creepy given the fact that it's a dead body. The circumstance there is already abnormal, Will's reaction is fine. The very first thing Hannibal and Will discuss is Will's trouble making eye contact, which is literally Hannibal recognizing that Will is autistic. People joke about Will saying that stuff about eyes and them then proceeding to eye fuck each other for the rest of every other episode of the show, but I think that it's more symbolic of connection than Will literally making exception for Hannibal. People seem to view eye contact as a prerequisite for real connections and being seen, but Will doesn't, and no one is willing to connect with him on his terms. But Hannibal recognizes his autism immediately, and for the first time, Will is able to make a connection. I would prefer if they didn't need to demonstrate this by having Will make eye contact as if Hannibal fixed him, but I don't think neurotypical audiences would understand that you can be in love with someone without feeling the need to stare at them in their eye color orbs all the time. And the fact that later on in the show Hannibal tells Bedelia, "I have to eat him," doesn't void the fact that he is in love with Will. Hannibal also says, "My compassion for you has become inconvenient." This implies that it's Hannibal's feelings for Will that he considers rude. So I think that Hannibal declaring his intention to eat Will is literally just him being gay and dramatic about having a crush. Speaking of which, Hannibal is a love story between two men. If you disagree with this, I seriously have no idea how you are interested in media analysis enough to watch this far without picking up on the gratuitous subtext and outright text in the show. Film has used ableism and queer coding to communicate evil to audiences since at least the Hays Code, and this includes horror movies. All too often, the slasher serial killer of the week will be associated with mental illness or some kind of sexually perverse deviant considered roughly analogous to homosexuality or queer stereotypes. If you want to know more, please check out Renegade Cut's video Maniacs and Psychos, Mental Illness in Horror Movies, and James Summerton's video Monsters in the Closet. The majority of representation for neurodiverse and mentally ill people in media is the dangerous outsider or the monster, and stigma bleeds through into the real world because it has created an association in the minds of the audience between real-life neurodivergence and the harmful acts perpetrated by these neurodivergent characters. I hope they don't have to say this association is manufactured. Mentally ill people are not the only perpetrators of harm, and not only is this stereotype hurtful, it's dangerous and untrue. People with mental illnesses are more than twice as likely to be the victim of a violent crime than the general population. In the rest of the video essay, when I refer to murder as queer or neurodivergent behavior, I don't mean it literally. I'm referring to the fact that this behavior has already been associated historically with queerness and neurodivergence since the genesis of the horror genre. So, a psychological horror series about a relationship between two men that deals heavily with mental illness is inevitably going to invoke some of these tropes. The neurotypicals and cisheads made the codes, alright, I'm just reclaiming them. Make Murder Sexy Again 2021. Where NBC's Hannibal subverts the classic serial killer flick is that it invites us to experience a story from the perspective of people that these tropes usually target. The murder and the cannibalism, broadly representing behaviors associated with neurodivergence and queerness, are intricate and beautiful in the show, and it makes you reassess your initial reaction to seeing it when you remember that, hey, those are corpses. The juxtaposition forces you to confront and critically analyze your initial emotional reaction in a way that mirrors how one might be prompted to closer examine what it is about cringe behaviors or radical queerness that cause discomfort, and what prejudices might these reactions feed into and off of. It's just that in one, the initial reaction is desire, and in the other, it's disgust. The important part is that the contrast between the beauty of the crime scenes and the uncontroversial belief that murder is bad sets you up to be caught out, and is an exercise in reassessing that gut reaction. The ability to catch and evaluate these prejudicial thoughts is invaluable if you're trying to, say, decondition yourself post cringe culture from how normalized it is to publicly humiliate autistic people. In terms of queer coding, Hannibal Lecter is stereotypically femme. He's dramatic, preoccupied with his appearance, hedonistic, and deceptive. He is a serial killer. He is in love with a man. He is also socially desirable, successful, independent, intelligent, and the entire show is about the protagonist and viewpoint character Will becoming closer to and more like him. He isn't the bad guy, he's the deuteragonist. Note that Will doesn't simply become like Hannibal in appearance. This isn't about Will becoming normal. Hannibal's visible bourgeois aesthetics mark him as other compared to the average person, just as much as Will's visible neurodivergence does. An excellent detail mentioned in Behind the Scenes' Hannibal video is that when Jack goes to Hannibal's office at first, he mistakes Franklin for the doctor and Hannibal for the patient. When Hannibal goes to Quantico in the next scene, he is dressed like Franklin was. It's just, in Hannibal's case, his aesthetics are a choice. He embraces being other and makes it a part of his identity. Opulence and pride are just as much a part of Hannibal as him being a serial killer is. If he were without one or the other, the character would be qualitatively different both in universe and as a cultural phenomenon. Hannibal prides himself in his appearance and takes great care and finds power in controlling how he is perceived. By contrast, Will's scruffier appearance early on in the series marks him as vulnerable next to Hannibal's sharp and professional tailored suits. Will has no control over how others perceive him. Will's wardrobe changes as he embodies more of Hannibal, embraces the socially undesirable and stigmatized parts of himself, and claims some of Hannibal's power. Through his relationship with Hannibal and finding solidarity in the other man, Will is very radically not fixed and continues to be an outsider in neurotypical society. However, his outsider status is no longer a problem. Distancing himself from Jack and the strict work or die mantras of capitalist society is shown to be nothing but a good thing for Will. Alongside the encephalitis, a major source of distress for Will in the first season is that he's constantly expected and guilt-tripped by Jack into subjecting himself to constant, graphic reconstructions of murder scenes at the detriment of his mental health. He's haunted by hallucinations of Garrett Jacob Hobbs, a direct consequence of him forcing himself to conform to what his employer demands of him. This is, bluntly, exploitation of Will's neurodivergence to make Jack's job easier. Yes, it's for the greater good, but Will's specific neurodivergence has been naturally sensationalized for TV and doesn't exist to that extent in real life, but serial killers do get caught in real life despite this. The necessity of work and the adherence to the neurotypical centric 9 to 5 schedule when navigating capitalism is disabling and traumatizing for many neurodivergent people, and Will Graham is no exception. So it's fitting that the series doesn't end with Hannibal being brought to justice and Will going on with life as a special agent. That outcome wouldn't be much better for Will than if Hannibal had continued to gaslight him. Instead, we follow Will's transformation from someone who is simultaneously expected to participate in capitalism yet denied the dignity of basic recognition of his disability and his needs, to someone who embraces being other and breaks free of the rigid, heteronormative, and neurotypical systems that damage him. The solution to accessibility isn't to reform capitalism to be more inclusive. The system is inherently exclusive and exploitative. Instead, Will begins to operate outside of these systems, radically breaking free from the hold they had over him. For a while, he still has a foot in both worlds. He conspires with Jack to trap Hannibal, but he still ultimately rejects a return to normalcy when he calls Hannibal to warn him of his Mona. Will killing and mutilating Randall Tier, once again, not literally neurodivergent behavior, but in the context of the horror genre, it is. It's a point of contention between him and Jack, who is the neurotypical, work-driven anchor of the show. Will embracing his otherness and progressively operating further and further outside of the law drives the two apart. You'll notice that season 1 is a lot heavier on the episodic police procedural killer of the week format than the later seasons are. The shift ultimately coalesces in season 3, when they are literally separated by Mason Verger, when Hannibal and Will are kidnapped and brought back to the United States, but Jack is left in Florence. He seemed to be a step behind Will, chasing after someone who was once a colleague and a friend, but has become unknown to Jack, who is an outsider to Mason's alternate criminal reality. It's doubtful that the Will we see in season 1 would even think to bite off a part of a man's cheek. Will is a part of that world now, and Jack is not, and unlike when Chilton seeks refuge at Will's house in season 2, this time Jack doesn't show up to catch the Chesapeake Ripper because Will called him. It's unclear how Jack knew Hannibal would be there, and that ambiguity is indicative of just how much Will has changed. From a cop who definitely calls the FBI on a man he knows to be innocent, because that's procedure, to a man who has removed himself from these oppressive institutions so successfully that it's even ambiguous whether or not he calls the FBI on the man he knows is guilty. By the way, these moments happen in exactly the same place in each season. Will calls the FBI on Chilton in episode 7 of season 2, and then doesn't call the FBI on Hannibal in episode 7 of season 3. I don't know if that's strictly intentional, but it's there in the text, and death of the author doesn't only mean that we get to beat Brian Fuller to death with our bare hands. After the episode where Hannibal is captured, Will does find himself slipping back into the grasp of the capitalist system, specifically when Jack comes to take him away from Molly and Walter to find Dollarhide. This is only natural, as no recovery or transformation is ever linear, and the fact that this is literally Will walking away from a superficial heterosexual marriage to pursue a man is not lost on me. No disrespect to Molly, she's a badass and I love her, and I am convinced that she named that dog Randy specifically to make that joke to Will over the phone. But that relationship screams mutual compare and comes across as more of a last attempt at a traditional family rather than a genuine romantic connection. They share painfully little screen time after all. If anything, Will's brief return to neurotypical society only cements the importance of his relationship to Hannibal in breaking that conformity. His return happens immediately after Hannibal is incarcerated, and it's not like Will is immediately able to function under the pressure of his job after taking a brief reprieve. In episode 9 of season 3, his work is shown to still be taking a toll on his mental health through the dream sequence, where he's once again tormented and starts to shatter. The stigma of his neurodivergence and Freddie Lounge's persisting manufactured image of him lingers even as he attempts to integrate into neurotypical society. Will can't escape these stereotypes and misconceptions and is confronted by Walter when he finds the old Tau crime article about Will. And Will's bluntness and ability to understand exactly what would piss Dollarhide off the most is sought out when the FBI has him aggravate Chilton's statements for the article they make Freddie Lounge write to drive Dollarhide out into the open. Dollarhide himself is representative of the destruction that forcing yourself to conform to the traditional heterosexual family ideal can bring. Dollarhide is also neurodivergent, having an unspecified dissociative disorder, with his alter being William Blake's Great Red Dragon. He kills families because he covets that perceived ideal due to his own traumatic upbringing. He's also subtly queer-coded as a result of his sexual deviancy and inferiority. I can't have been the only one who found that scene where he kidnaps Chilton to be strangely homoerotic. Just a side note, as a sometimes painfully insecure, occasionally paper-eating, physically deformed autist who moves weirdly sometimes and can do exactly one pull-up, I feel painfully seen by Dollarhide. Dollarhide resents the fact that he is seemingly unable to achieve that perceived familial ideal, and it's not a coincidence when he's the one who targets Will's family. Literally speaking, he's going after Molly and Walter because Will is going after him. But thematically, this is the relentless and ultimately doomed pursuit of normalcy coming back to bite Will in the ass. Will isn't straight or neurotypical, and denying that not only harms himself but those around him. Will can't give Molly the heteronormativity she wants from Walter. He's far too emotionally involved with Hannibal for that. And Will isn't able to function within the capitalist structure, and that's okay. It's not reflective of any personal flaw, it's something that he has to accept before Dollarhide destroys him. The ending of Hannibal is therefore, in my opinion, perfectly fitting. The FBI's plans to catch Dollarhide within the neurotypical law are thwarted when Dollarhide intercepts Hannibal's staged release and kills all of the officers, leaving Hannibal and Will to face him alone without the backup of neurotypical society. They embrace murder, and they take him down together, defeating all that Dollarhide represents. And when Hannibal tells Will that this is all I ever wanted for you, for both of us, and Will replies that it's beautiful, his transformation is complete. Will has embraced his otherness and is able to find beauty and pride in that fact. He no longer has to subjugate himself to emotional torture for a wage or pretend to be something he's not, and instead of rejoining society afterwards, they become the furthest removed from it they have ever been, disappearing together off of a cliff to never be seen again. Thank you for watching if you got this far. I hope you found this analysis interesting, and I wholeheartedly welcome alternative opinions in the comments. This is my first foray into video essays because apparently my love for NBC Hannibal supersedes even the most powerful writer's block. But, I've got no idea if I'll do another video essay ever. It's probably going to be very sporadic. But feel free to drop a subscribe. I do animations sometimes.